Hey y'all, Van Lufa here. Today I am watching and recapping the Derek Chauvin trial so you don't have to. Yesterday was day 8 of the trial, April 7th, 2021. They continued with the state's witness, I believe 26, Jody Steiger. He was the use of force expert from the LAPD. They showed some of Officer King's body cam footage just to get a time of when the restraint itself began and when it ended, and the duration was 9 minutes and 29 seconds. They talked about what specific force he used. He used body weight. They showed Exhibit 254, which were 5 different photos of the incident using the milestone cameras, which are the public safety cameras at the scene. They just showed a series of photos from the time they got him out of the car and put him in the restraint. They showed Chauvin's left knee on the neck area with a right knee on his back. His feet were spread apart on the ground. Just talked about how the majority of his weight was on his knees and that his position and the amount of force did not change between photos. They asked if there was any other type of force used on Floyd. Yes, towards the beginning of the restraint, Derek Chauvin used his right hand and appeared to use a pain compliance move on Floyd's left hand. He showed a picture of that. He asked, did you see Mr. Chauvin stop use of the pain compliance technique during the restraint? No, he did not. They went over the use of force policy again and the factors that are considered in the use of force. They consider the severity of the crime, whether the suspect was an immediate threat to the officers or others, or whether he is actively resisting or attempting to evade arrest. It has to do with the number of officers versus the number of suspects. That is one of the considerations. At this point, there was 5 versus 1. Based on his opinion, Floyd was not actively resisting while in the prone position. They talked about proportional force again. They looked at the use of force continuum again. He kind of explained that a little bit. How much force was reasonable after Floyd was cuffed. They spoke about that. He said no force should have been used once he was in the prone position. He gave again the definition of deadly force. They showed the composite photos again, which were the 5 photos. Would that have constituted deadly force? No. He asked, have you ever had to use force in the view of bystanders before? And he said yes. Have you done so in front of a hostile crowd? Yes. He defined what a hostile crowd was. They showed the bystander photo again, because he talked about a hostile crowd would be people that are throwing rocks or throwing bottles at cops, and he had done that before. So they asked him, did you see anyone throw rocks or bottles in that picture? No. Did you see anyone attacking the officers? No. Was there foul language and name calling? Yes. And did that factor into your analysis? No. He didn't perceive the crowd as being a threat. Exhibit 203 was Derek's training records. They had documented 866 hours of paid training for him. They said, should that have been enough training? Yes. And then they showed some body cam footage where Floyd was begging, obviously for his life. And after that, he was continued. He had been restrained for another 6 minutes after that. On cross-exam, Eric Nelson, of course, trying his best to discredit this gentleman. Have you ever testified in any other court as a police use of force witness? No. Have you ever been qualified by any court as an expert? Yes. In LA, he has testified in a use of force trial. Was all of his training with the LAPD? Yes. He said, you agree that policies of every department are going to be a little different to some degree? Yes. Most agencies use the Graham versus Connor policies, so it's pretty standard. Upon being hired for this, you do receive lots of materials from. Okay, so they asked when he was hired to do this, did he receive lots of materials from MPD? Yes, he was. He did. He was not able to see all of the PowerPoint presentations because they were in PDF form. I'm not sure why he couldn't see them, and he had not seen the training videos by MPD that are embedded into those PowerPoint presentations. He prepared a written report that detailed his findings and opinions. That report was 461 pages. 26 of those pages were his opinions, and the rest were the materials that he received. He was given 5,737 different items to review. He relied on his training and experience to do that. He submitted the report in January of 2021. They asked him if he had received any additional information on this case since then, and he said no. They talked more about the incorporation of the Graham versus Connor into their policies. Talked about how the use of force must be viewed from the reasonable officer at the scene, and that the totality of the circumstances, they have to be considered, and he said yes. So he said, your conclusion was that it was excessive use of force? Yes. And he said, that's not standard, is it? The question is whether it is an objectively reasonable use of force, and he said yes. He talked about the factors to consider when using force. He said Derek Chauvin was initially the primary officer for the call, then it changed and he was not. And he said yes. Then they said code 1, which means get there fast, and what they said was that Floyd was 6 to 6.5 feet tall and under the influence. And does the officer have to rely on that info when going? Yes. And at that point, the 911 dispatcher heard a loud noise, so that's when she sent backup, and that's when Mr. Chauvin was dispatched. When he showed up, he knew some type of force was being used. He observed 2 officers putting Floyd in the back of a cop car, and he described, would you describe that as actively resisting? Yes. Until the time Floyd was placed prone, he was actively resisting? Yes. Reasonable force was used to get him back into the police car? Yes. Floyd saying, I can't breathe, as he was actively resisting? Yes. Initially, when the officers put him in the prone position, was this a reasonable use of force? Yes. An arrest can be chaotic? He said yes. They showed King's body cam again. Did Floyd say, I ate too many drugs? He said, I don't know. And I couldn't hear it for sure either. There was so much going on at that moment. The officer called EMS, yes. Cannot increasing your use of force be considered a de-escalation? Yes. And then at that point, after they had called EMS, the bystander, the viral video, she started recording after the call to EMS had been stepped up from a code 2 to a code 3, yes. Even if the use of force looks bad, can it still be lawful? Yes, based on each state's policy. And use of force can sometimes attract a crowd, yes. They took a break. Would you agree that as time went on, the crowd got louder? Yes, they were more concerned, he said. They showed the use of force continuum again. And he asked, based on his behavior then, was the response appropriate during that time? And he said yes. Was your review of the material you were given more focused on defensive tactics and policies? Yes, it was. You are aware that Chauvin took phase 1 of defensive tactics in the year 2020? Yes. Did you review the materials? Yes. Then they showed the materials. That particular phase 1 was dealing with demonstrations, protests, and crowd control. It was basically the policy in treating larger crowds. They are taught to never underestimate a crowd's potential. Yes. They discussed distractions from the crowd. And then they said, would calling an officer names be considered a threat? And he said that would depend on the training of the officer. And that somebody yelling a threat at an officer, he cannot use that to justify force. They discussed more about the neck restraints. They showed another photo of the scene with Mr. Chauvin on top of him. They were just discussing weight, weight shifting and balance, those types of things. You agree that on 5/25/20, MPD authorized use of neck restraints, and he said yes. They showed another photo of Chauvin on top of Floyd, and they just at this point showed a bunch of different photos from just different angles, from different body cams to show him on top of Floyd. He said, were there times from that footage that Floyd picked up his head and tried to move it? And he said he attempted to, yes. On redirect by the state, he said, is risk for asphyxia because of pressure on the neck or body? And he said, no, it's for pressure on the body. And then he said, the point is that both of his knees were on his body the entire time, right? Yes. He asked what code 4 meant. Code 4 means it's clear and everything's okay. So prior to Chauvin arriving, Officer Lane had called back code 4. Yes, he had. They showed another body cam footage of him being put into the car. He said, you were shown pics of an officer with his knee on the base of his neck. Yes. That is in order to handcuff them, right? Yes. Well, Floyd had already been handcuffed. So what he was getting at here was the restraints that are authorized by the department are neck restraints that they can use to get a person cuffed. Just to restrain them, get control over them so they can safely put cuffs on. But the point here is Floyd already had cuffs on. On cross-exam, he said, you were not there the day that occurred, right? He said, no. You wouldn't know how people felt, right? No. State's witness number 27 was James Ryerson. He is the senior special agent. He is in a use of force investigation group. He's a plainclothes cop. He started in 2007. He talked about his education and work experience. He started, originally he started working with NYPD for 4.5 years. From there, he was an agent for the DEA. He left them in 2013. He just discussed his other positions. And in 2018, he started out at the BCA, which is the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. He completed a forensic pathology degree working on his doctorate. And on 5/25/20, he was the case agent for this case. He got called around 9:45 that night. He reported to City Hall because a critical incident had occurred. He followed the protocols. He was given a briefing. He took photographs of the officers, and then they showed the photo he took of Chauvin. He learned that the weight of Chauvin was approximately 140 pounds, and that the weight of the equipment on him was approximately 30 to 40 pounds. He took his equipment and firearm per protocol. He also got to see the body cam footage. He has seen all of them. He also got a copy of the CAD report, which is a transcript of all of the radio traffic that took place and the milestone videos. He also received an audio file of the 911 call. He watched the bystander video. Then he went to the scene. He arrived on the scene around 2 to 3 a.m. He saw the two vehicles, which were Floyd's car and the squad car 320, and he seized those items for the BCA, or he seized those cars. They took a lunch break. He did testify that he escorted the two vehicles to the BCA headquarters in St. Paul for processing. On 5/27, they were processed. They showed the map of the scene again. He showed about where the cars were. They showed surveillance footage from the Dragon Walk restaurant across the street. Does someone from the BCA usually attend the autopsy? Yes. Did they? No. Due to COVID restrictions, they were not allowed. A blood sample was also obtained from Mr. Floyd and sent to the lab. They received the autopsy report on June 4th of 20. They also received a copy of the toxicology report. In December of 2020, per prosecution request, the SUV was processed again to obtain a possible pill. He was present for that search, and also the squad car was reprocessed. Defense Okay, so the defense attorneys also requested to see the inside of the squad car at that time in December. He obtained medical records on Floyd. They just showed more body cam still photos, more of, Chauvin on the neck. One photo showed the paramedics showing up. On cross-examination, he was just questioning, so 50 BCA agents were involved, yes. The BCA executed approximately 12 search warrants in this case, yes. 25 to 26 FBI agents were involved, yes. 200 citizens, witnesses were interviewed, yes. They interviewed witnesses who weren't there, yes. So basically what they did was they found on the footage from the street cams, they would see cars driving by, they would get the license plate number, look them up and call them and see if they knew anything. There were approximately 440 investigative reports that were prepared for this case, yes. Apparently there was a tip line that citizens could call into. The BCA did give permission for the defense to look at the car. The agents would have had to open the seal of the car, and the agents were present, yes. So after the car was initially processed in June, or I guess it was the end of May of 2020, they seal the doors and write their name and a date on it so that they would know if somebody else was going to try to get into it. So he said, you aren't implying that the defense put pills in the car? And he said, no. The defense wasn't even allowed to touch or manipulate anything. He discussed the investigation. In May of 2020, were you present for the car being processed? He said, not the whole time. Did you see the pills in the car in the photographs? He did not. They showed more body cam footage of Chauvin getting off of Floyd. On redirect, he said, okay, so he had a problem with Nelson showing the video footage of him saying, I ate drugs, without showing the context of what the officers said prior to that. On cross-exam again, he said, are you a mechanic? No. Do you understand that the car had a hybrid engine? So basically what was talked about was there was some liquid substance that was flowing out behind the car during the time, and I guess people thought it was urine, but it actually ended up being condensation from the AC. I'm not sure why that's a thing, but they talked about it. Before they let him go, they recalled him again to ask him some more questions. They reviewed him playing they reviewed the tape of Floyd saying, I ate too many drugs. On cross-exam again, they showed the Dragon Walk surveillance video where Morris Hall appears to be getting rid of something in the car that he didn't want the cops to see. State's witness 27 was Mackenzie Anderson from the BCA. She works for the Forensic Science Lab. She is a forensic scientist. She talked about her education and the different jobs she's had over the years. She works a lot with DNA. She's been at the BCA since 2014. She talked about her roles at the BCA. Last year, she responded to approximately 30 crime scenes. On 5/25 of 20, she was called to the scene. She arrived around 1:15 a.m. She was there for 2 hours. She got a briefing when she got there. The area was processed. She was made aware of a video and she watched it, and it helped her find where things were so that she could go and try to collect evidence from those different areas. No blood was found, but it had rained that night. So there was no evidence collected from the scene itself. The vehicles were then towed from the scene. She left around 3:30 a.m. And then on 5/25, they processed the vehicles. She discussed that process. They showed photos that they had taken of inside the vehicles. They had a photo of the doors taped shut after the car was processed. And then they talked about the car being researched on 12/9/20 for additional items to be removed. They needed to collect some pills, some gum, and money. They showed photos from the second processing. They also recovered an open Suboxone package. She also retrieved 2 pills from the BMW, and she sent those to drug chemistry. They also reprocessed the cop car, or excuse me, they processed the cop car on 5/27. They showed photos of that. They showed a pair of shoes in the back of the cop car and a black strap that was recovered. There appeared to be bloodstains in the car, in the back seat of the squad car. There was a picture of a pill on the floor, but when they were processing the car initially, they did not remove it. She said she didn't know what she was looking for at the time, so she wasn't sure if that was important. They reprocessed that vehicle on 1/27/21. Defense looked at the car. They removed the pill. They did DNA testing on the pills, or they did chemical analysis on the pills. They did do DNA testing on 8 different what appeared to be blood stains in the back seat of the squad car, and on 2 $20 bills, and on a pill. She described how they do DNA testing. She tested a pill for DNA. It had Floyd's DNA on it. She talked about finding blood in the car. They showed pictures of all the blood stains, and they all did test positive for being Floyd's blood. There was no cross-examination. State's witness number 28 was Brianna Giles. She works for the BCA. She is also a forensic scientist. She gave her education and different jobs she's had for the years. She works for the chemical lab at the BCA, and she tested items in this case. She tested a glass pipe, and it was positive for THC. She tested 2 similar pills that were recovered from the center console in the BMW. They were round, similar. They had pharmaceutical markings on them. She talked about how she tests those. They tested positive for oxycodone and acetaminophen. They contained, and then item 51 was a partial pill, and that was positive for small amounts of meth and fentanyl. Another partial tablet was positive for meth. Another partial pill was meth. And then there was an item 54 that was noted in the photos, but she said they were not submitted to her for analysis. On cross-examination, he questioned some of the pills tested again. He just wanted to reiterate that 2 of the pills with the pharmaceutical markings were found in the center console of the BMW of Mr. Floyd's, and all of the other pills or partial pills or pieces were found in the back seat of the squad car. Then, at the end of the day, Aaron Eldridge from the state interviewed state's witness number 29. It was Susan Neath, who works for MNS Labs in Pennsylvania. She's a forensic chemist and has been so for 27 years. She's also worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 7 years prior to that. She's specialized in drug analysis. She talked about the duties of her job. She has done approximately 6,000 tests over the years. Most of those were quantitative analysis. She described the process of that. She confirmed that she did in fact receive 3 pills from the BCA. They just talked more about the pills, where they were found. They performed fentanyl identification process on them, and they did a methamphetamine process on them. They talked about it, and they just continued to really talk about all the pills that were found and what was in them. And some of those little pieces of pills had small traces of fentanyl and meth. And that was how day 8 stopped. I've not watched any footage from today's. I will start watching that tonight when I get home. Like I probably mentioned previously, we have company here from out of state, and I'm just going to be behind. That's just how it's going to go. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you are enjoying this series that I'm doing, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.